So when we first started talking about you composing a piece for this project, you had mentioned your Southwestern roots and um, and what might inspire you to write a duo. And so, how did you come about this piece?
Yeah. So I've been thinking a lot about, what it's like to write music from the place that I grew up in. I mean, I didn't grow up with classical music at all. I grew up with folk music and jazz music. And so I played in the jazz bands and I played in rock bands and I played a lot of folk music with my grandpa. And when I went to school and conservatory and like a circuitous path to becoming a composer and loving classical music, I kind of just like did away with all of that. And then I realized about 4 years ago, actually when I met Gabriella Lena Frank around that same time, that actually there's a lot of riches to be had from where I grew up and studying the music and the people that come from that place in New Mexico. So I decided when you asked to write a duo piece, to write a piece about something that has to do with a duo in New Mexico. And there was a very obvious duo that's near and dear to my heart, and that's my twin sisters, Elena and Elise. And, like any siblings, we've had a lot of good times, a lot of fighting over the years, a lot of sibling bickering. And in a sort of strange turn of events, they both became pregnant within a month of each other. And they both gave birth this past fall to new kids. And so I decided to write the piece Cuates, which means twins, about my sisters sort of occupying this parallel path, but also disagreeing on so many things. Like one had a boy, one had a girl, one lives in California, one lives in Texas, one is an old college athlete, played soccer, college soccer. The other one really does not like playing sports and would much rather focus on like fashion and design. But they also are both 4'11", short brown women, who like some people couldn't tell apart until they were 14. So it's paradoxical. They're very alike, but they're also distinct. And so the piece, I wanted to have two violins to have similar abilities, and then find how much can they be their own, and how much can they share the stage together.
What's serendipitous is my duo partner, Sha Peng Liu, is actually a twin.
Yeah.
But I didn't know that until our first rehearsal. And we were reading about what inspired you to write this piece. And she said, well, actually, I'm a twin. That completely blew me away.
It's weird how many twins there are, and twins run in my family. Every generation has some twins, pretty much.
So, what compositional techniques reflect your sisters?
Well, this piece, for some reason, probably because it was so personal, was one of the hardest pieces I've had to write. And not because of a lack of material, but because I rewrote the opening maybe 6 times. Like completely, like trashed it all, redid it, trashed it all, redid it. But there are a few things that stayed each revision. One of them was my sisters' names are Elena and Elise, so E and A. And I really wanted those two pitches to be central focuses, which is quite fortuitous since A and E are really good strings for the violin. It's not
That
like
makes me very happy.
me too. Good thing she wasn't named like D flat or, a G double sharp or something. Actually, that would be good. That would be an A. But yeah, my, so that was nice. And I didn't really. I obsessed over trying to be really folk inspired and like very overt, and it felt really forced. Uh, and then I decided to sort of back up and just write music that I liked and I heard. And I wrote part of this while I was in New Mexico visiting my folks for a month in the fall. We did a heavy quarantine for a few weeks, stayed in one of their extra bedrooms, and just made a huge month-long trip out of it to stay there and just enjoy New Mexico. And finally, I got the piece going while I was there. But the piece is really about the battle between A and E. One of them's being tonicized, one of them's being subverted. They're working together sometimes. Sometimes they decide to go in different directions and take over motivic material that one created and sort of turn it upside down or make it more minor or go to a different key entirely. So it's really just about A and E and how they relate to one another.
So, tell me about the workshopping process, because this is completely foreign to me until this project. And it's been really a fascinating thing for me.
Well, it's also like brand new during times of pandemic to workshop in this fashion. you know, I feel like, some of the workshops that have worked really well, I think this one included, have been the ability to sort of just like throw something out there and not be embarrassed about it. As a composer, like any writer or a creative person or a producer or audio engineer, having someone of a high caliber look at something that you made when it's not finished is really anxiety inducing, right? And it takes a lot of trust because you're worried the whole time. It's hard to get out of the mindset of they think I'm an idiot. They think I'm so stupid. I can't believe I put that there. These people are like highly trained violinists and I made them play that of all things.
I think it's perspective actually, because I think we were nervous to play for you.
Yeah.
It was like, oh my gosh, she's going to think we can't do this kind of thing.
But and I'm sure hopefully it was similar for you. Once I got past that feeling, I was like, oh, we can just get work done now. We can very, very easily and without attachment say this is working. Keep this. This is not working. Let's push that
Mm.
aside. I don't need to be married to that. This is working better than I thought it would, and it's only happening in one spot. I should do more of this because it's really flattering, or it actually, the way it looks on the page is not how it sounds, and the way it sounds is better than the way it looks on the page, or vice versa. It's really sad
Right.
when something looks great on the page and sounds terrible after that
It,
much work.
it was fun for me also because Xiaopeng had some terrific ideas and solutions, right, for some of the sounds you're trying to accomplish that I hadn't thought of.
Cool. She's a great player. How did you meet Xiaopeng, by the way?
Xiaopeng does a lot of activist work with her music in terms of trying to heal police violence with music. And when my partner, who was a police officer, experienced racism in his job, she was one of the people that came to town hall and was supporting him, um, and that's how I first met her. And so I've gone to a couple things that she's done, and she's so incredibly creative, and she improvises, and I thought I would love to be able to work with her. And and so when you said two violins, I was thinking, okay, two violins. This is who I would ask. And I didn't know what to expect, you know. And yeah, she's been terrific.
That's so cool. I will admit, I said two violins, and then I immediately regretted it. and then, because, but I'm glad I did because it was it took a lot of. It's one of those things that sounds great as you say it out loud, and then once you start to write, you're like, oh my god, they have the exact same range, which I knew. That's why I asked for that. But you suddenly start thinking like, oh, there's all these conflicting moments. Like, how do I fit them in with one another? And it I'm glad I did it because I think the piece is better because of it. If I had done like cello and violin, there's so many easier solutions to things. There's just like, oh, the cello's there, violin's there. They just occupy their spaces.
I
But
can't remember what some of the instruments we had thought about. You had mentioned percussion at one point,
I think
I
so.
think.
Yeah.
Um, and but you wrote a piece for two flutes that I heard that I liked.
I actually had like PTSD from the two flutes piece, which had the same. That's overstating, and I'm just kidding. But I actually, I thought about that piece. I was like, oh, I remember this feeling actually. I'm feeling a little bit cornered, even though I asked for that. It's my own doing. But it really, I think the benefit of two violins was that I realized was I think it really prevented you from falling too much into the trope of one's accompanying the other.
Mm.
Because at the turn of a dime, one could be behind the other one. Like one could be
Mhm.
in front, and the ear actually can't really tell who's in front. I think there's a lazy way to write the piece where one violin's always in front and one's always in back. That would be very
Mm.
lazy and not very satisfying for the players. But I think it's nice that the two violins are sort of like this double paned window, right? That's not a very good
Mm.
analogy, but there's just anything could
That's
pop through.
that's good. The one duo that's very much like that I immediately thought of was Prokofiev's famous two violin duo
Oh, that's right. Yeah.
because they're very equal, right? And it's not just one following the other. They're very much their own voices, but kind of similar that way, very melded together.
Yeah.
So the Southwestern influence has actually permeated a lot of your works, like Pepita. Is it Pepita?
Pepito.
Pepito. It is Pepito. And and you have another opera in the works, is that right?
I do. I actually have two, possibly three operas in the works right now, which is a little stressful. But all of them are surprisingly and fortuitously Southwestern inspired. So I'm currently Pepito is finished. I'm currently working on Tres Minutos, which is an opera about separation at the border. Two siblings, one born in Mexico, one born in the United States, and the one born in Mexico is deported. And the story takes place well after that, and it's them talking on the phone. And there's a program, which is a real government program, called Through the Border Angels, which the Border Patrol opens up the border for like an hour every few months, and they sort of lottery off a 3-minute time slots for people who
Wow.
cannot cross. And you could sort of meet and give and like hug, touch your relative for 3 minutes, which is like a fairy tale amount of time when you think about it. It's both generous and kind of cruel. And I mean, the Border Angels is a nonprofit. I think they're just making the best with what the government gives them. So the whole opera is about them organizing this meeting, having all these expectations to fix all of their sibling problems in that moment. And then they're together for 3 minutes. And then, as you can imagine, what do you do in those 3 minutes? Not much of anything. You actually can't solve any problems in that amount of time. All you can do is really like reach out and try to connect with anything. So we're doing an opera about that with music of remembrance. I have an opera in the works about 1950s Mambo California culture and the Korean War called Gilberto. It's pachucos that get drafted who are Mambo dancers that go to Korea and face prejudice and sort of learn about, their idea of what it means to be American and whether or not they're valued in the way that they think that they're valued. But it's got Mambo, which should make it fun. And I'm also working on a proposal about the civil rights activist Dolores Huerta, who was a co-founder with Cesar Chavez of the United Farm Workers out in California. And that is being proposed through West Edge Opera. We're currently in this sort of like phase where we're pitching ideas and people are voting on it. And people can visit West Edge Opera's website to learn about it. The next thing is actually I'm excited about is with Mass Opera in Boston. So I should hopefully be headed out to Boston by the fall or whenever it's safe to travel.
Oh, wow.
And that's to work on an opera called Caravana de Mujeres, or Caravan of Women, which is a comedy with a librettist, Laura Baratti, it actually takes place in Spain, and it's this ridiculous news story my wife found and sent to me, and then she was laughing like, what if this was an opera? Wouldn't that be funny? And actually I said, well, actually, this is a really good story, and it's about women they pay like 20 euro to get on this bus. And they're all immigrant women. It's a service mostly targeted towards immigrants from Colombia and Mexico and Central America. And they get on a bus, and they're all from the city. They like live in Madrid, and they go out like 3 hours into the countryside. And they get off the bus, and the bus company has organized a dance with all of the farmer men who live in the countryside. So it's like a dating service. And all of the men are like, Spanish men who are secluded. And they're like, sometimes they're anti-immigrant, but they're also looking for love because all the Spanish women have left the countryside. It's just men who farm. And all the women who are immigrants are tech savvy. They're on Instagram. They know how to use social media. They have all the luxuries of living in the city, but they want to find a husband. They're sick of the city. They actually want to live in the countryside. And so it's a weird story of people who almost dislike each other, but have something that the other wants. And they're both looking for companionship in strange places. And in the story, there's like a mother who's really anti-immigrant, and she's mad at her son for going to this dance to find a wife because she says he should marry a proper Spanish woman, but there are no proper Spanish women that he can marry. So the story was very sad and serious, but also really funny. And also like a sort of reversal of power. These women were really being immigrants, but being tech savvy were really the ones in power. And the men were the ones feeling kind of left behind, but they really wanted to preserve their Spanish culture, so they had to find somebody. Anyway, so it's a story about this woman and her niece go to one of these things, and they run into one of their ex-flames, and It's actually not really about finding a lover. It's actually about the relationship between the niece and the aunt, who are
Hmm.
fighting over what it means to fall in love. Like they
Hmm.
disagree on what companionship should even look like. Um,
Do you work with the same librettist for all of these?
I do work with the same librettist for almost all of them. Morella Martin Cook. She is my primary collaborative partner. With the Caravan of Women opera, I'm working with a mutual friend of both of ours named Laura Barati, who's actually like Morella's best friend. They're both very fine librettists. Um, but Laura's mother is a Colombian immigrant, so Laura was really resonated with the story
Mm.
um, of of a woman looking for partnership, being an immigrant, being in a different country. Um, yeah, so
Do you find usually do you find the stories you want to write about, um, or are you commissioned with a story in place?
I have always found the story that I want to write about for the most part. Like
'Cause
Pepito came in a hybrid way. We were supposed to pitch these operas to Washington National Opera, um, and my librettist had a traumatic, not traumatic, but like a strange experience adopting a cat. In that the person who was supposed to adopt her, the cat, was very intense, and she felt like she was adopting a human child or something. The person was like, what is your home situation like? We're gonna do home visits. What's your annual income? And she's like, I just want a cat. Like what? And I really wanted to do a story about like losing touch with your cultural home. And we actually found a sort of a marriage of those two ideas in that the woman looking to adopt a dog, in this case Pepito, the dog's name is Pepito, she's Latina, and she discovers that Pepito is an older dog who's not doesn't feel in place at the shelter because
Mm.
nobody wants him, but it's because he grew up in a Spanish speaking household and he doesn't understand everybody else. But when she speaks Spanish by accident, he understands her, and they suddenly click. And so we
Mm.
found a way to combine both of those ideas. But so far, like the Mambo opera is based on my grandpa's life. He hitchhiked out to California, danced mambo, and got recruited into the Korean War. Not recruited. What's the word? Drafted into the Korean War. The Dolores Huerta opera is an opera I wanted to do for a while about my cousin, civil rights activist, and the Caravana de Mujeres is just a news article that I found.
Well, the story about the angels at the border
Mm.
is just, oh my gosh. When you were describing that, I was just imagining the mixture of gratitude of being able to see your sibling, but also the pain. It's just, um, wow.
Yeah, it'd be really hard.
I can't even imagine. It's just, and that's happens. I mean, that's the reality for so many families
Yeah,
now.
that story was inspired by a friend who was it was engaged, but past tense because she did get married, was engaged to be married to an undocumented immigrant from Mexico, and he was actually deported, and they had to move to Mexico to be married and start a family, and it was partially inspired by that. And then when we did research, we realized so she didn't participate in the Border Angels thing 'cause she didn't need to, but we learned more about what other people go through at the border. I mean, for that one,
Mm.
we interviewed a bunch of immigration attorneys. I have a cousin who's one, and people who help people who are unlawfully detained, um, immigration status. It's such a huge issue and a huge aspect of our legal system, just to deal
Mm.
with people who, other than just existing in the wrong place, didn't really do much wrong.
Mhm.
Um, so it's a pretty big topic.
It is a huge topic. Well, I also imagine some of the young people who have never been in the country that they're being deported to back to. It's not really back because they've never ever been there, and I can't imagine uh, trying to learn to be in a different country that you don't feel connected with.
Yeah,
But it's
I couldn't
just,
imagine either. God, it's
yeah.
like
I think it's amazing that you're writing these pieces about. about these issues and bringing them to life. I loved listening to your music because there's humor in your music and there's lightness, but as well as gravitas. And I think anytime one needs to bring forth issues like this, it's helpful to have all of that.
I really appreciate that. I think it's so important, which I didn't really realize was important until just a few years ago, but it is so important to show a lot of joy in the protagonists in these stories, even when they're going through things that seem unspeakable. I think in our minds sometimes we think of people who suffer as people who just like grit their teeth, stiff upper lip, and just deal with the worst for years and forever, you know, and that's just not true. It actually dehumanizes them. It takes away the small moments of light that they find, even when they're
Mm.
facing terrible odds. Like, in the Gilberto opera, my grandpa Benavides, when he was on his deathbed, I was talking to him about his service, and he was a really happy-go-lucky guy. He's a very joyful person, but he was just looking at me seriously during hospice, and he was like, I have terrible PTSD, and my dad was telling me, all growing up, you knew to never wake him suddenly. You should never like surprise wake him up because Korean War was terrible for a drafted, very low ranking foot soldier.
Mm.
He found a lot of things that were traumatic. He informally adopted a young Korean boy while in Korea that he found in a village, which actually he named Pepito, which is where my opera Pepito gets its name from.
Ah.
And he taught this boy Korean and taught him how to sing and dance, and sing and dance in Spanish. I'm sorry, he taught the boy Spanish and taught him how to sing and dance in Spanish and hid him in like the laundry bin and hid him in his uniform and fed him from his rations for like a year. And the boy taught my grandpa Korean, he never went to high school. My grandpa was not a very, what we would consider a highly educated person. But all growing up, he would speak snippets of Korean to me, which I didn't put together as a child, because he found joy in it. He obviously had a lot of fun with that
Oh.
boy in Korea, even though he was facing maybe the worst year of his life. And I think it's really important to bring that joy, even in those
Mm.
moments.
I also appreciate that you're embracing your roots, actually, and it's part of your composing. Um, I think too often young composers are taught to try to fit into a certain milieu or certain style, right? And I think things are changing that way. Do you think?
I think
Um,
so, actually. I feel like,
yeah,
I'm young, but I'm not that young. you know,
you're young to me.
I think there's always different cutoffs for what a young composer is based either on career or age. By many metrics, by some competitions, I'm no longer young. By others, I might barely still be considered young for another year or so, depending if the cutoff is 30 or 35. But, but but I've noticed even though, I've been trying to compose or composing for over a decade. When I started off, it was true. I felt like pressure, not from my immediate teachers, but from the scene to write a certain way, to be hip a certain way, to try to do things a certain way. There were sort of very few stylistic avenues to pursue. And now when I see undergrads at different schools of music, even the same ones, they're just like doing whatever the hell they want, in a good way. Some people are finishing up their classical music composition degrees and making hip hop albums, and some people are traveling and doing, folk music festivals in Turkey, and it's just like anything goes in a really good way. And I feel like there's less judgment from the scene. I mean, I say that idealistically. I'm sure there's plenty of judgment, but there's always judgy people. But I feel like young undergraduate composers are doing really amazing things that I would not have felt comfortable doing when I was an undergrad.
Do you think that the classification of classical music will change, or I guess be more all accepting of other cultures and um, styles? Uh, I mean, what we don't have to put this into the interview, but I'm curious to know your idea as to how you think, the definition of classical music will be. Um,
Yeah, it's a
you
super hard question. I, I talk with friends about this all the time, and I feel like we never have a good answer. I feel like and actually the question becomes like, what defines a genre or a cultural movement in general? Just like what defines a political party, Republicans and Democrats look nothing like Republicans and Democrats from 100 years ago, right? Only in name, because as the needle moves slowly day by day, you could be completely unrecognizable come a century later. And classical music has been around longer than political parties in the United States, so it's even worse.
Mhm.
I mean, realistically, does how much does Bach have to do with Schumann? I mean, some, sure, but really that much? There's a huge span of time. Or even like Stockhausen and Bach, like are they really related? And we still
Mm,
classify them in the same group. I don't know. Anyway, this is too long of an answer. My short answer I've settled on recently is it has to do with, I think, the people that you participate with, and not so much the actual artistic output. I think if someone were to write exactly Mozartian music at the same time, but live in like, you know, rural China and have never heard of Mozart and had nothing to do with Mozart, I actually wouldn't consider them related to Mozart, because the way that they arrived at that would have been through their community. And maybe it was the exact same thing. It was convergent in some strange way. But
hmm,
I think really what it has to do is the people that you are inspired from and the people that you are inspiring, which maybe helps think about what's the difference between opera and musical theater. Musically, it depends on the piece. It doesn't actually matter that much sometimes. Some opera is very musical theatery, and some musical theater is very operatic. And people can argue about, well, in opera, we sing through the scenes no matter what, but just not that's not true. Actually, opera has plenty of spoken word as well, so that doesn't work. And in opera, we have key changes, and well, musical theater, Stephen Sondheim has key changes. So like, I don't know. The only thing I can think of is just the consistent groups of people that go to one and go to the other. And sometimes there's a Venn diagram
mhm,
of shared people, but sometimes not. So that's a really long answer. In short, I actually think there are big changes happening in classical music. Like, American Composers Forum has been really straightforward about trying to define who a composer is and change the definition to be someone who just organizes sound. Like, you can be a composer without writing notes down. You can be a composer if you use synthesizers and make
mhm,
synth pop. You can be a composer if you write words on a Word document and tell people to interpret them a certain way. Any of those things are organizing sound, and that
mhm.
is what makes you a composer. So I think things are becoming more inclusive, which is really nice.
Hopefully, um, we can change the mind of the more snobbish attitudes about what classical music should be.
I agree, and actually, like, I came late to, and I'm not afraid to admit it's like uncool to like really like Beethoven and stuff. I really like Beethoven actually. I came to it so late when I was 18 and 19, and I was an undergrad. I signed up for voice lessons because I was playing in a funk band, a touring funk band, and I really wanted to sound better for my funk band because I was playing saxophone and singing. And they said, we don't have a funk teacher, we have a classical voice teacher. And I was like, well, singing is singing, right? And I signed up for it, and I just like fell in love with it. I was like singing Schumann, Henri Duparc, like all the great leader. And I auditioned for operas. I came late and I loved it. It doesn't have to be snobbish. I knew nothing about classical music. And I remember the first time I heard Brahms's German Requiem, I was just like on the floor. I couldn't believe how beautiful it was. It's just,
Mm,
I didn't have any associations of this is what like elite people listen to. It was just what I liked in that moment. I thought it was brilliant.
mm.
And I think lots of people will find similar things in music by living and dead composers if we take away some of the institutional baggage that it has sometimes.
Thank you for spending this time with me. I
Thank you.
appreciate it.
It was great seeing you.
Great talking with you.
Bye.
Bye.